In 1845, a fungus reached Ireland and began rotting potato fields black within days. The potato had quietly become the caloric engine behind 2 centuries of population growth across Europe. But the potato's story does not begin in Ireland, or anywhere in Europe at all. It begins nearly 8,000 feet up in the Andes Mountains, roughly 8,000 years ago. There, high above the tree line, Andean farmers found a bitter, frost-hardened wild tuber. They learned to freeze it at night, thaw it by day, and stomp it into a food that would keep for years. They did not know they were solving a problem. One day it would feed an empire. Later, it would collapse a nation and ocean away. By around 3500 BC, Andean farmers had domesticated the wild potato. It was no longer bitter or dangerous to eat. It had already spread across the high plains near Lake Titicaca. The soil there sat between roughly 12,000 and 14,000 feet above sea level. Maize could not grow there. Wheat could not grow there. Almost nothing people in the ancient world depended on for food could grow there. Potatoes did not care. Farmers eventually cultivated thousands of distinct varieties, suited to specific altitudes, frosts, and soils. It was an agricultural safety net no single grain could match. The technique that made the crop truly powerful was preservation. To turn a harvest into insurance, you spread the tubers across the ground overnight. The high-altitude frost froze them solid. The next day, under the sun, you stomped the water out of them by foot. Repeat that for several days, and you had a freeze-dried potato called chuño, light enough to carry over mountain passes, durable enough to store for a decade without rotting. A drought or a failed harvest in one valley no longer meant starvation. Chuño moved food across distance and time as fresh produce never could. Storage. That alone would have made it valuable, but its status in the Andes climbed higher still. Growers pushed potato cultivation up past 13,000 feet, where the air held roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. No other staple crop could form a usable harvest there. The Inca state treated that resilience as a strategic resource. Administrators built stone storehouses called kolka across the empire and filled them with chuño, tracked and rationed the way a modern treasury manages a strategic reserve. It was insurance against drought. It was insurance against war. In any valley, in any year. Lose a harvest and you still ate. A single well-stocked storehouse could reportedly feed a garrison of thousands. For several months. The potato also carried medicinal weight. Twist an ankle, and Andean healers pressed raw potato slices against it. Travelers carried dried tubers against altitude sickness. The potato also carried religious weight. We do not usually think of a root vegetable as sacred. The Inca did. Andean farmers made offerings to Axomama, a potato goddess believed to protect the harvest. They buried tubers alongside the dead as provisions for the next world. This was not just a crop. It was the foundation of one of the largest pre-Columbian empires, stretching over 2,000 miles along South America's spine. But the people who carried the potato to the rest of the world had no appreciation for it. Potatoes are short-day plants, wired to the nearly equal daylight near the equator. When Spanish ships brought them into Europe in the 1570s, the long summer days left the plants barely able to form tubers at all. Many Europeans feared it besides, as we rarely fear food today. It belonged to the nightshade family, alongside belladonna. For generations, it was blamed for leprosy. Between the mismatch and suspicion, the potato spent roughly 200 years in Europe as a curiosity, not a crop. This is the part of the potato's history that most people never learn about. Solving the daylight problem took generations of quiet, unplanned selection. Farmers across Spain, and later the rest of Europe, replanted whichever tubers formed under long summer days. Over decades, those descendants adapted to European daylight. Nobody understood genetics at all. That did not end the suspicion. In France, an army pharmacist named Antoine Augustin Parmentier became convinced the potato could end the nation's bread famines. He petitioned King Louis XVI for a plot of poor farmland outside Paris. He planted it with potatoes, then stationed armed guards around the field by day. At night, he pulled the guards away. Whether every detail of that trick is historically accurate remains debated among scholars, but the result is beyond dispute. Post a guard by day, pull him away at night, and you assume it must be worth having. Word spread that the crop must be worth stealing. Farmers helped themselves in the dark, and within seasons, Paris was obsessed with it. In Prussia, Frederick the Great chose a different method: force. In 1756, he issued a potato ordinance that ordered peasants to plant it or face amputation of their ears and nose. The peasants, predictably, were not enthusiastic. Frederick was not amused. Across the continent, monarchs who once dismissed the potato as unfit for human beings now forced it onto their poorest subjects' plates. Of every country forced into growing it, none adopted the potato faster or more completely than Ireland. You did not need a plow, a horse, or a mill to grow it. You needed a spade, some seed potatoes, and enough rain, which Ireland never lacked. Plant a single acre with potatoes, and you could feed a family for most of a year. That was several times more efficient than the grain it replaced. Landless laborers rented tiny plots from landlords, grew almost nothing but potatoes on them, and paid their rent by working the landlord's other fields instead. Between the early 1700s and the 1840s, Ireland's population climbed from roughly 3 million people to more than 8 million. That growth was driven almost entirely by potato calories, but cost-cutting narrowed the crop further still. Farmers increasingly planted a single high-yield variety called the lumper, prized for thriving on marginal land where almost nothing else would grow. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. The lumper was perfect for poor land. It was perfect for feeding people cheaply, and almost nobody grew anything else. Potatoes are grown from cuttings of the tuber itself, not from seed. Every lumper plant in Ireland was, in effect, a genetic clone of every other lumper plant in the country. There was no genetic diversity to fall back on. There was no resistant variety waiting in reserve. There was absolutely no plan B. In the autumn of 1845, a fungus called Phytophthora infestans reached Ireland inside a shipment of infected seed. Within days, entire fields collapsed into a black, foul-smelling pulp. That first harvest alone destroyed nearly half the country's potato crop, and the smell of rotting stalks hung over entire counties for weeks that autumn. If this story is landing hard, hit subscribe. History like this is easy to miss, and there is a lot more of it still to come. The following year was worse. The blight returned in 1846. It wiped out almost the entire harvest a second time. Families who had survived on a single field were left with nothing at all. Disease followed hunger. Typhus and dysentery spread through crowds fleeing toward overwhelmed workhouses. They killed as many people as starvation itself did. Landlords watched tenants who could no longer pay rent, then calculated that clearing land for cattle was more profitable than housing people with nothing left to give. Meanwhile in London, Charles Trevelyan, the Treasury official in charge of famine relief, insisted that Ireland's crisis was best left to the market to correct. Ships kept exporting Irish grain and livestock to England throughout the disaster. The famine was not simply a natural disaster. It was a natural disaster, made catastrophically worse by political indifference and deliberate policy choices. By the time the blight finally ran its course in 1852, roughly 1 million people had died of starvation and disease. 1 million. Think about that. Roughly 1 million more had already boarded ships out of the country, never to return. Those emigrants left in numbers Europe had never seen, most boarding overcrowded, disease-ridden ships known as coffin ships. So many passengers never survived the crossing. Ireland's population fell from about 8.4 million people to under 6.6 million within less than a decade. That was a collapse of nearly a quarter of the population, through death and emigration. Few families in Ireland escaped it untouched. Word of the disaster spread across Europe, alarming governments about what it implied for their own food supply. Nowhere else on the continent had allowed a single variety of a single crop to become the difference between survival and catastrophe for so many people at once. The nation the potato had helped build had just come apart because of it. Collapse. Trust in the crop itself did not disappear. Blind faith in any one variety of it did. What Ireland needed next was not less potato. It was a way to grow it that could survive what the lumper could not. That fix did not arrive for decades. Plant breeders spent the 19th century crossing surviving potato varieties in search of resistance to blight. In the 1880s, French vineyard workers discovered, almost by accident, that a copper and lime mixture sprayed to stop mildew on grapevines also stopped the same fungus on potato leaves. Applied at scale, it finally gave farmers a defense the lumper never had. Production recovered. The potato's reputation recovered along with it. In 1853, at a resort restaurant in Saratoga Springs, New York, a cook named George Crumb reportedly sliced potatoes paper thin. He fried them to a crisp after a diner complained his fries were cut too thick. Whether the story happened exactly that way is disputed, but the result was not. Every thin, salted, fried potato slice since traces back to that kitchen in Saratoga Springs, 1853, a snack that spread from there by the barrel, then the bag. Eventually, it became one of the most eaten foods on the planet. A century later, an Idaho farmer turned industrialist named J.R. Simplot solved a different potato problem. If you ran a restaurant kitchen before his fries existed, hand-cutting potatoes was part of the job. Restaurants wanted French fries without peeling, cutting, and frying fresh potatoes on site. Freezing a raw potato had always ruined its texture, turning it soft and gray the moment it thawed. In the 1940s, Simplot's engineers worked out how to blanch, partially fry, and flash freeze potato strips that kept their shape and crisped properly, straight from a freezer, into hot oil. In 1967, McDonald's adopted Simplot's frozen fries nationwide, ending hand-cutting in every restaurant kitchen. The convenience was real. So was the new dependency it created. Monoculture again. Frozen fries fry consistently from only a narrow set of varieties. Restaurant chains pushed farmers toward planting the russet Burbank across Idaho and Washington. By the early 21st century, a handful of varieties accounted for most potatoes grown for frozen food nationwide. They were kept alive with irrigation, fertilizer, and pesticide spraying, on a plant with little natural resistance. Idaho alone now grows roughly a third of America's potatoes, most of it destined for a freezer truck, not a dinner table. The system behind fast food, 2 centuries after the famine, was leaning on the same narrow genetic base that had once starved a nation. We rarely think about where a fry comes from before it reaches a cardboard sleeve. This is the part that should make you angry. Today, the potato is the 4th most grown food crop on Earth, behind only sugarcane, maize, and wheat. Global production runs roughly 375 million tons a year. Not bad for a lumpy root nobody wanted. Poland and Russia, among others, distill a meaningful share of their vodka from it, turning the same starchy tuber that once caused a famine into pure alcohol by the billion liters. It sits in freezers almost everywhere tonight. Fast food chains alone serve billions of orders of fries every year. Almost all of them come from potatoes, descended from a tiny handful of varieties, grown on industrial farms an Andean farmer stomping chuño would not recognize. An 18th century farmer would be stunned by the scale of it. The plant that once could barely form a tuber under a European summer sun now grows on every continent except Antarctica. The potato was never just a side dish. It was the caloric engine that built an empire and later broke a nation. Across roughly 8,000 years, it traveled from a bitter, frost-hardened tuber on the roof of South America to the single most consequential vegetable in human history. The Inca built an empire on top of it. Europe feared and rejected it for 2 centuries. Ireland came to depend on it so completely that one failed harvest emptied the country of a quarter of its people. It cost roughly 1 million Irish lives. It forced roughly 1 million more people onto ships they never expected to board. It fed an empire. It emptied a nation. It never stopped growing. And it is still sitting on the counter in your kitchen right now, in the bag of fries, the bag of chips, or the bottle of vodka, waiting to be noticed. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind everyday things people eat and drink without ever thinking about them. We have got a lot more coming.